Hello and good afternoon. My name is Kathy Harriet and I am a library technician for the Charlotte County Libraries and History. And I am here with...
I'm Spencer Pullen, also a library tech.
And we are here to talk about cameras, specifically Aperture, and what that means to the quality of your photos, whether you have depth of field, whether you are overexposed. It's very important to picture taking. Spencer, the way I think about Aperture is when you go to the eye doctor and they put those demon drops in your eyes and they dilate your pupils. That is a wide aperture in your eye, and it makes the light very bright. That's why they give you the little glasses. So the wider the aperture on the camera, the more light gets in.
Absolutely. And I've used the same analogy, only like with a garden hose. If you have a bigger hose, that would be a wider aperture. And what you'll find in photography, it seems like things are always backwards. So a low number like 2.8 means a big aperture versus like f22, which means a small hole. So it's almost kind of backwards. But once you do it for a little bit, you get the kind of the photographer's thinking, and it's not so confusing.
So photography is backwards.
It seems like it is, yeah.
At least with Aperture. Now, say you want to take a beautiful picture on this sunny day, and there's all the white clouds and the blue sky and the trees. What's a good aperture for a picture like that?
So basically if you're going to be doing like landscape photography where you want everything in focus, especially maybe not so much here in Florida, but if you're in a area where there's a lot of mountains, you want to make sure everything is in focus, you probably would want to use something like f16 or f22, that smaller aperture. So then that way you're going to ensure that pretty much everything in the image that you're seeing is going to be sharp.
Right. Because you're not really looking to have something focused in the front and then the out of focus in the back.
Correct.
Very interesting. So you said 16?
F16 would be something good for that, yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you were going, the moon. Okay. Now the moon's kind of In the last video we talked about the moon. The moon's a little bit different because it is so far away. It's not like something that's 10 feet away from you. You could basically shoot that with 5.6 f4, so that way you can get a faster shutter speed, which we'll talk about next time in our video, shutter speed. But just simply because of the distance that's so far away, you can get away with shooting that virtually at any aperture and it'll come out sharp. But when I've shot the moon myself, I've shot it actually at f16 on a tripod, and it was good and sharp.
Good.
And one of the things you should bring up probably is about portraits. So if you're trying to take a portrait of someone or of maybe even your family pet and you want to try and blur the background, because that's one of the things that people generally want to learn when they're getting into photography. They'll see one of these images that have these beautiful blurred backgrounds. They're like, how do we do that? And then the person or the family pet will then pop out of the photo. And that's where you use a wide aperture, like we were talking about, like 2.8. So that's going to be a big hole in your camera, or in your lens. That's where the aperture actually lives. It's in your lens of your camera. It's like a diaphragm. It opens and closes like this depending upon what you tell it to do.
Okay.
But yeah, for portraits, things like that, the lower the number, the better.
And then you just adjust the ISO or the
shutter speed.
Okay.
To make it all balance out, yes.
Okay. See, we're making a formula here. Last time we talked about ISO, now we're covering the aperture. Gee, I wonder what's next. What about that blurred background thing? What do they call that?
Oh, the bokeh?
Is that bokeh?
Bokeh.
Like Boca Raton?
Yeah. Boca Raton. Yeah, on the other side of the state of Florida. No, it's that's what they call it. It's a Japanese word, I believe, for the smoothness of an object. I'll have to double check on that, but I do believe it comes. The origin of the word comes from Japan.
I have a question.
Okay.
You know, you see the beautiful picture, and then like from the light, there's like sunbursts coming out.
Ah,
That have something to do with the aperture?
yes.
Okay.
So if you're trying to shoot towards the sun, or if you have sun coming through trees, I'm thinking of like a forest shoot, and you want to get all those rays of light just to, like you were explaining, kind of shoot off, that's where you need a small aperture. So that's where your f/22 is going to come into play, or something with a very narrow opening, and those are actually called sunbursts. And that's how you get those little lines. Or if you want to shoot at night, so maybe if you're shooting like maybe in a downtown area where they have the lamp posts on, if you want those, instead of just being kind of like a fuzz ball, like a cotton ball that look like this, and you actually want them to have like little streaks coming out of them, then that again is where you can shoot a narrow aperture like f/16, f/22.
Can you do that with Christmas trees? Like Christmas lights? Or is that too many lights?
No, you could. Yeah, that would actually probably work with Christmas lights. So that might be a way to get fancy with your Christmas photos.
Fancy.
So certain lenses that you'll find, like if you bought like a camera kit, it might have come with 1 or 2 lenses, and it might say, for example, like 4.5, or I'm sorry, like 4 to 5.6 or 6.3 or something like that. So we're talking about like 2.8, which is a very, very big opening. So generally those kit lenses that you get with your camera, they don't open that far. So what will and you'll know if you're going to have a lens that will achieve like a 2.8 aperture or wider, such as 1.8 or 1.4, or some lenses go down to 1.2, simply because you're going to pay for it. So that's where really the money in photography comes into play, is you'll find you start paying for 2.8 glass or wider, it gets much more expensive on the lenses. So these lenses here, let's see.
Like this one says 4.5 to 6.3.
Yep, so there you go. So so they're called variable aperture lenses. So for example, like this one she's got mounted on this one, it's a 15 to 45. This happens to be a Canon M50. And so at the 15 millimeter, which is a very wide angle mark, the biggest aperture you can get is 3.5, which is pretty good. But as you zoom the lens, or like you've got your telephoto lens, like you might use for birding or something like that, as you zoom the lens to a bigger number, in this case on this lens that's mounted on this camera, be 45, the maximum, or I'm so sorry, the biggest aperture that we can get is 6.3. And on Canon, it's actually on the front of the lens barrel right here.
Now.
So that's something to think about. You know, if you're a wildlife shooter, if you're shooting indoors where you need to stop action, maybe if you're a sports shooter for high school volleyball game or basketball, something like that, that's where that other lenses are going to help you. Now, for example, if you see a lens that says like 70-200 and then just says 2.8, so no other numbers, it's 2.8. That means whether you're at 70 or you're zoomed out to 200, you can keep the 2.8 aperture. That's a constant lens. Now, it'd be great if we all had one of those, but they're like $2,500. That's one lens.
Yeah.
So that's why, again, I mean, for some people it's worth it to have that opening because they need the light for the speed. But if you're just an everyday shooter, any of the lenses, I mean, all the lenses we have today compared to what we even had 15 years ago are amazing. So you can take great photos with whatever it is that you have.
So I have a friend who's a baseball photographer for the Major League and Minor League Baseball, and he does college baseball photography. And I've seen his card. He's had baseball cards with his photos on them and everything, but he's got that big long lens. That's those really expensive ones.
Really expensive ones. Yeah, that's, now you're getting up into the 400 2.8.
Yeah.
That's 400 millimeter with 2.8 aperture. They're really big. And then they make also like a 600 millimeter f4. Now those are also fixed, so it means that they don't zoom. They're set at one focal length, and that's what they're great for, is like a sports photography. But now you're talking about some serious bucks. Now you're talking into like the $10,000 to $15,000 for a lens.
Yeah.
So, it's great for professionals or for media people that need to rent these lenses for something like that. But if you've ever looked in Sports Illustrated and seen those types of sports images, they were probably shot on one of those really high-end pieces of glass. So something, we're talking about about the biggest diameter that you can get in any of these lenses. Now we're talking about 2.8, f4, things like that. Now, like on these lenses here, just because it says, like for example, this 15 to 45, it says it'll go up to 6.3 at f45. Now, if you're a landscape photographer, you could put this on 45 millimeter, which would be zooming in a little bit, but you're not stuck with just 6.3. That's just the biggest opening you can get. You can actually go in and then start going to f8, f11, f16, f22, those higher numbers to get more smaller diameter opening, which then allows to get more of your scene in focus.
Okay.
So they just tell you what the biggest aperture that particular lens will go to as far as the biggest opening, but you can crank them down for us up into the f16, f22 generally.
So say you take a picture that you think is going to be beautiful, you think you have the right aperture, the right ISO, and the right, what's that third one?
Shutter
See, I don't
speed?
remember the words.
Shutter speed?
Shutter speed, yes, that's it. However, you get that image on your computer and one of them must have been wrong because it's blurry, or it's not blurry, it's dark, or it is overexposed, or it's just not sharp. Is there something you can do with that?
The exposure problem of being too light or too dark can be fixed to a point. If it's a little dark, that we can deal with, that we can lighten up in post with something like Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever program you might have. If it's overexposed, so now it's too bright, depending upon what part of the image is too bright, you may not be able to recover that detail, because if the pixel is a white pixel, it's not going to automatically replace it with blue sky, for example. Now, as far as if something is blurry, that's an autofocus problem, and there's no way to really recover.
Or Kathy put it wrong, problem.
Manuel?
Yeah, Manuel. Manuel. It was Manuel.
The other thing that will happen with speaking of aperture and kind of the autofocus deal is, for example, like if you're taking group shot and you have two people that are stacked like this, one behind another, and you need them both to be in focus, and you shoot it with a wide open aperture, like say 2.8, f4, somewhere in there, the first person's going to come out nice and sharp. The second person's going to be kind of blurry. So if you're ever photographing groups of people and they're layered in rows, you want to make sure you're using like f8, f11 to make sure that the depth of field carries from the front line to the second group to the third, however many you got to have. So for example, I shot the local symphony here in Punta Gorda many moons ago for a magazine, and I was actually up in the back part of the theater. And if you've ever seen a symphony, there's, I don't know, probably 50 people on stage with all their instruments and everything. So I actually shot that around f22 to make sure that everything was nice and sharp from front to back.
That explains why the tall people in the back of all of my group shots are just a little bit not right.
They're a little blurry?
A little blurry.
Oh, okay.
A little blurry, just a little.
And something you can always, if you're not sure, is on a lot of these cameras, on the mode dial here, what they'll have is like a scene mode, or on like a Nikon camera as well, they'll have like a picture of a mountain or a picture of a face. So if you know that you're going to be taking a landscape shot, then you can put it on the mountain one. And basically what you're doing is you're actually setting the aperture in the camera that way. You don't need to know all these numbers. You can just go, oh, okay, I know I want everything in focus, put it on the mountain. If you want to do a single person or that single family pet, put it on the person one that looks like sometimes looks like a lady with a hat. There's some of the icons I've seen. And then that will allow you to help blur the background, put the focus on the subject, which obviously is the person or the pet.
Now, they also have the one with the running person. So
yes.
that would be like for action shots.
Right.
Where you're trying to catch a bird, maybe?
Correct.
For
That would
drop,
also work.
because they fast.
That's more for shutter speed.
Okay.
But that's a good setting to use if you're going to be doing something like if you have young kids at the playground and they're on the swings and you want to get some, you want to freeze them in time, which we'll talk about next time and more in depth. But that's something that you could use the Running Man for, which is the sports setting.
The Running Man.
The Running Man. Chariots of Fire. We're not wrapped too tight here, as you can tell.
We're a little tired.
All right, so in the last video we talked about ISO. If you didn't get a chance to check that out, you can either go on our Facebook page and do a search for Charlotte County Library, or you can always go on our YouTube channel, which is Charlotte County Community Services. You can do a search for that and it'll come up, and it's called ISO. You can read all about or watch everything about that. So then you've got this one here in Aperture. So next time when we get together, we're going to talk about shutter speed, and that'll be all kinds of some different effects you can do with that, or like she was talking about, if the picture's blurry, depending upon your situation. If maybe you're shooting from a boat and you're trying to get birds off of a boat at a rookery, so we'll talk about how to fix that next time. So this is all going to come together. So then we'll have the ISO, aperture, shutter speed for you guys to look at. And we'll have a manual that we'll have available. It shows how to actually shoot in manual mode, so that way you can start taking your photography to the next level by inputting into the camera your own settings. It sounds kind of scary at first, but once you do it a couple times, it's pretty simple.
He's made me do it a couple times, and I'm still scared.
She survived.
I'm still scared. Alrighty, folks, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for more photography videos. And check our Facebook page. We have all kinds of events going on, all virtual, and join in and get in with the community and enjoy your library. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Have a good one.